So it's not just about reducing actual fraud, but also for the operators protecting themselves against allegations and perhaps illicit allegations of fraud just to try to achieve a chargeback.
Welcome once again to Low Rollers, the weekly gambling industry podcast presented by CasinoReports.com in partnership with DraftKings Casino. I'm Third Planet Media Senior Editor Eric Raskin, your guide for the next 40 minutes or so of gambling talk. I thank you for joining me, and by the way, don't forget, for just $100,000 a year, you can get Low Rollers Premium, where the podcast arrives in your feed 10 seconds earlier, so you can wager on prediction markets about what I'll say with an informational advantage over everybody else. But whether you're getting the premium package or not, I think you're going to get a lot out of my interview segment this week. Coming up in just a few minutes, I'll be joined by Evan Davis, an attorney who leads the gaming and sports practice at Royer Cooper Cohen Braunfield LLC. I've actually known Evan going back to his days at what I think was still known as Sugar House Casino at the time. Evan had a recent LinkedIn post about a conference he'll be speaking at this fall, and it caught my eye, and I thought, why have I never asked Evan to come on the podcast? But I promptly remedied that. Thankfully, he was available. And so we'll be talking about compliance, authentication, fraud, KYC, AI, skill games, the prediction market court cases, and a whole lot more. But before I bring on Evan, and before I do my little news monologue, I want to tell you about DraftKings Casino. A big thank you to DraftKings Casino for sponsoring Low Rollers, helping keep the reels spinning, so to speak. And in case you haven't heard, one of the most popular games out there, Lightning Link High Stakes, is now available for play on DraftKings Casino. Here's the deal. New players just need to make a minimum of $5 in wagers, and they get 1,000 spins, including 500 Lightning Link spins. Lightning Link has the hold and spin bonus feature and linked-in progressive jackpots, so new casino players strike now to land this exclusive Flex Spins offer only at DraftKings Casino. For the promotion, you must be 21 years of age, physically present in Connecticut, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or West Virginia, void in Canada. Eligibility restrictions apply. One per new DraftKings Casino customer. Opt-in required. Spins issued as 50 spins per day upon login for 20 days. Game availability may vary. Offer ends August 23rd. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. In Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Okay, time for a quick look at the recent news, and two stories stand out, and they're related to an extent. Just after we posted last week's podcast, the news hit that IG Group was acquiring Underdog. Massive $1.3 billion deal, plus all sorts of potential additional payouts for some employees. Just a huge piece of news in the gambling industry M&A streets. Then this Wednesday morning, we got the news that Peter Jackson is stepping down as Flutter CEO, and, interpret stepping down however you like, but I think we all know these things usually aren't just the CEO making the decision to move on. And this, of course, comes a mere 3 months after FanDuel CEO Amy Howe stepped down as well. So it's a pattern. So we have top of the org chart turnover at Flutter and FanDuel, and we have Underdog thriving, big valuation, big sale. Part of this is just cyclical. Nobody stays on top forever. There's always more interest in the hot new thing. But the obvious connection here is the rise of prediction markets. Underdog made the move into predictions. During its presentation on the Underdog acquisition, IG Group said that by an unnamed future date, gaming spend at Underdog could be 99% prediction markets, 1% fantasy sports. Underdog is noted for its flexibility, but obviously, if the company wasn't positioned to succeed in prediction markets in the US, IG Group wouldn't be paying 10 figures for it. Meanwhile, we've all seen how prediction markets have hurt the stock prices of the major, more traditional online sportsbook operators. Whether they're cannibalizing business much or not, they're lowering investors' expectations for what sportsbooks can do and will do. If not for the rise of Kalshi, seems to me there's every reason to think Peter Jackson and Amy Howe are both still in their positions at Flutter and FanDuel. On the one hand, nobody knows if sports betting at prediction markets will be legal or available in a year or two. On the other hand, you have to be proactive. You have to take positions. And obviously, a lot of people are operating under an attitude of, if prediction markets stick around, we need to be at the front of the line. For now, that's good news for Jeremy Levine and others at Underdog. not such good news for the higher-ups at Flutter, who are turning into the former higher-ups at Flutter. These are turbulent times in our industry, and, I'm sure we'd all welcome some stability, but I'm not counting on us getting any of that anytime soon. Okay, let's get to the interview. Please enjoy a few seconds of music, and when I come back, I'll be joined by gaming attorney Evan Davis. We're going to dig into some gambling world legal talk this week on Low Rollers as I welcome the man who leads the gaming and sports practice at Royer Cooper Cohen Braunfield LLC in the Philadelphia area. And before that was Deputy General Counsel for Penn Entertainment. And before that, Deputy Counsel for Rivers Casino Philadelphia. He's been an attorney within the gaming world for a little over a decade now. He will also be speaking in November at the World Gaming Leaders Summit in Miami. And the topic caught my eye: payments, fraud, and compliance. So we'll talk about that and more with him today. Evan Davis, welcome to Low Rollers.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I don't want you to use up all the material that you have planned for November, but I do find this topic very interesting. Your panel is titled, "Can You Really Trust the Customer? Identity, Authentication, and Fraud in the Age of AI." There are a lot of offshoots here. I'm sure you'll hit on a bunch of them on the panel, but I guess my first point of curiosity is, in regulated markets, how prevalent is identity fraud, people not playing as themselves, underage kids maybe starting accounts, etc., or is this mostly an offshore/unregulated problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to how we want to define identity fraud. Whether it's wholesale, pretending that you're somebody else and using stolen credit cards, right? And those types of things versus using somebody else's account. And I think those are two different things, but obviously they can pose some of the same challenges. So in regulated markets, you're going to see a lot more of the latter, right? These are real people who are truly signing themselves up for their accounts, but then every time, how do we confirm that this is actually the person who's logging in? And I think this is somewhat prevalent. You see a decent amount of this, and some of the geolocation data supports this with underage college students who might have like a parent even sometimes who are complicit in this. And you see that it's the parent's account, but all of the logins are coming from the college campus where their kid goes, right? So this has always been some form of concern. I think the one thing that is often misunderstood about the industry, and certainly about the regulated industry, is that this is not what anyone wants. And this is true for responsible gaming really across the board. The operators are by and large focused on promoting responsible gaming. They want to have a customer who's a customer for a long time, who loses an amount of money that they are comfortable with, sees this as a form of entertainment. So I think that, yeah, there's always an issue and there always will be, but it's perhaps not the level of issue that we think it is. And, no different than other things that are perhaps age or identity regulated. I'm sure there are 20 and 19-year-olds on college campuses who are being provided alcohol from people who are purchasing it legally and perhaps, distributing it illegally. So I think this is a problem, or it's at least an issue that is, somewhat ubiquitous across regulated industries that limit by age, identity, or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as you're talking there, I'm thinking about that a few years ago, almost all of my apps that I use changed my login. Suddenly, there was like a facial capture to do my sign in on just about all of them. And I guess I never even really put the pieces together of that it wants to confirm that I'm the person logging in and not someone potentially underage. I guess that was a lot of the talk behind the scenes as operators started going that route, was facial identification to log in order to eliminate that or reduce that problem at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and then you see KYC has evolved to now some of them need, scan your driver's license, but also take a live selfie, right? And try to, at least on account sign up, do that. But again, if you think to what's needed to even sign up for a credit card, right? Where you can get tens of thousands of dollars of purchasing power under somebody's credit line. And theoretically, if you have their social security number and their address, I got my identity stolen once a long time ago just by somebody having that information. So this is an issue that affects industries far beyond sports betting or gaming.
So I guess that, that's one way, the facial ID and such, that we've seen progress from operators in their KYC checks over the last, I guess, 8 years or so, really, since regulated online gaming started to pick up and sports betting legalization, really the main thing. Have regulators also, in your experience, gotten better at policing, enforcing, knowing what to look for? Have the regulators progressed along with the operators, would you say?
Well, I think it's hard to really craft oftentimes what you see in regulations is when they try to get too far into the weeds and they end up creating more problems than they're solving just from a UI UX standpoint, right? It creates user friction or it creates complexities that are unintended, but really problematic. And that's not the goal of the regulators and certainly not the goal of the operators, right? And there's way more that you theoretically could do on KYC, but I always like to take these examples to the extremes and say, if you wanted to, right, you could say, well, in order to open an account, you have to send in your fingerprints, right? And we could do these things. In order to get my TSA pre-check number, I had to go get fingerprinted, but arguably we care that's a little bit higher of a bar, and it probably should be. So where do we want to draw the line, right? And where do we want to make it so we're never going to be perfect, but where do we feel like we are preventing, a large amount of what we can reasonably prevent? And what I say, right, this is someone coined this phrase of, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so I think we have to look at this and say, we can always be better. What can we be doing? Where can we be evolving to make it better, but without just killing the industry and making the user friction such that, we're not going to get anyone signing up for these things anymore. The other thing that I think is often perhaps misunderstood or at least underappreciated is that it is very much in the operator's interest to prevent any sort of fraud whatsoever for a variety of reasons. And this is perhaps most misunderstood in the unregulated or lesser regulated markets where, chargebacks have become a real problem. And not even actual fraud, but alleged fraud, right? There are people who might use a credit card, deposit, lose their money, and then file a chargeback request or file a dispute with their credit card company. And now the credit card company looks at the operator and they say, well, what did you do to verify that this was in fact the right person using this? And it's incredibly helpful if the operator can say, well, we got the last four of their social, we did a live ID scan, right? We did all of these things. This was in fact the person using it. So it's not just about reducing actual fraud, but also for the operators protecting themselves against allegations and perhaps illicit allegations of fraud just to try to achieve a chargeback. So I think you're seeing more and more operators understand that it's in their commercial, if not only, compliance and regulatory, but their commercial interest to take this to the best level they can without truly endangering the user experience and creating excess friction.
This is sort of on topic, but maybe slightly off. Is just, there's a lot of complaining, much of it valid, from gamblers, sports bettors, particularly about banning customers in the regulated environment for questionable reasons. But in your experience, is a lot of that actually also happening for totally valid reasons to people who are looking for ways to multi-account, collect bonuses under multiple names, et cetera? I guess that from an operator perspective, that's something that I guess they're very much on the lookout for, and that maybe a lot of these bans that people are complaining about are for those sort of very valid reasons.
Yeah, I think in some ways, though, there's a chicken and egg argument there of, right, well, if an operator bans somebody because they are, winning too much, then what does that cause that person to do? It causes them to go and use somebody else's account, right? And, we hear a lot about this with spouses. I mean, that's common, but, others, right? And so are they committing fraudulent actions by pretending to be somebody they're not? Yes. What would that have happened but for the initial, inability to do this under their own true identity. So we can, I mean, that's an argument that you can have. And I don't know that there's a quote unquote right answer there, but I think that there's no question that one tends to feed the other.
So one of the elements of the title of the panel that you're on is AI. So I'm curious how I know in the panel title just says in the age of AI. So I'm not sure the extent to which AI is directly a part of all this. Is AI playing a role in this topic and how people are adjusting on both sides?
Yeah, look, I think the AI is going to play a role in virtually everything. So, talking about sports betting or gaming as though it's some unique case is, I think, if there's any one negative I would say about our industry, it's that we really tend to have blinders on and think that most of the problems that we're dealing with are somehow unique to us. And very few of them are. There might be slight aspects that make them a little bit unique, but the lion's share of these things are, being realized certainly by tech companies, by consumer companies, right across the board. So when I think of things like identity and fraud and compliance generally, I think we need to think about the role that AI has already just started to play, but will continue to play an increasing role both on the problem side and the solution side. So on the problem side, what does that look like? Well, can I get a deep fake, right, video that now will pass the live selfie? Can I do this, and this? That technology is going to continue to evolve. But on the flip side, what can we do to use, and we can call it AI, but just can we use, right, computer data driven and computerized intelligence to help to better understand, right, what we should be understanding. There are companies out there, I'll give a plug to one, YASPA, that's doing what they call intelligent payments, and they're able to really sort of work with operators in a more unique way based on what they're doing, with the idea being that, right, we can use more of what's at our disposal to reduce fraud and to reduce fraudulent payments. So I think that any third-party technology provider needs to be thinking about that, right? Not in the world of like AI, we can, need fewer people to do our jobs and all of that kind of stuff. But how can we be using technology to ultimately deliver a better mousetrap? And part of that better mousetrap is, defeating the problems that AI is causing as well. So like in the context of use this for good and not for evil, like how can the industry take the negatives and the positives and make the one that they want to win out? And that's going to be largely driven by the third party, providers that are sourcing this technology to operators and doing the best job at it.
That's something I end up talking about whenever responsible gambling is the topic that we end up, it veers into how AI is helping to enhance operators' ability to detect patterns and notice when someone is veering from their usual gambling habits and all that. So yeah, as you said, AI can and should be part of the solution for all of this stuff. I guess it's a matter of making sure that the solution end is keeping up with or staying ahead of the people trying to use it for ill on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that we're understanding that, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, right? And so if we want to generate real solutions, we need to be able to use real data to do that. And, we see these issues with responsible gaming a lot, where if somebody who has a gambling problem, but that gambling problem is spread around 7 or 8 operators, each operator is acting on what they know and they don't see an issue. But when you aggregate it all together, it tells a different story. So, how do we use data for good to accomplish the goals that the industry ultimately wants to accomplish without, intruding too far on I think on someone's privacy, but I think most users would agree that not all, but a lot of users would agree, like, yeah, if you're using my data for good, right? Then like this is a good thing. It helped prevent somebody from spoofing themselves as me, or it helps, a runaway gambling problem or things like that. I think most people would say that that's a net positive.
As we're talking here, I'm now flashing back to right before we started recording, and we were both talking about our respective teenagers, and so now I just like have to be on the lookout for when our kids are getting ready to go off to college. If my son is like, "Dad, do you mind if I just capture your face real quick? It's for nothing. It's nothing," that like we have to worry that they're going to have some sort of AI replica use of us in order to circumvent the system.
There's some movie I watched a year ago or so. It's a terrible movie. I forget what it was, but it had like, the president of the United States got kidnapped and they were like holding her at gunpoint to like read this sentence that was, like the quick brown fox jumps over, lays it down. And it was because they could then like take that and manipulate her voice into saying like literally whatever they wanted it to say. Right. And so look, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves on like where that's going. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly 20, 30 years from now, the things that we're doing, I mean, look back 20 or 30 years. And if somebody asked you what your mother's maiden name was, you'd be like, I don't know, I'll tell you. What's it matter? And now all of a sudden every antenna goes up, right? So yeah, 20 or 30 years from now, the things that we take for granted are going to be like lightning rods.
Moving on to a handful of other topics in the gaming space that I'd love to hit with you. You actually wrote a guest article or two for Casino Reports a couple of years ago about so-called skill games in Pennsylvania. And you noted at the time that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was taking up the case. They ruled a couple of months ago that skill games are slot machines and are illegal unless regulated. Was that the ruling you expected? And do you see Pennsylvania ultimately passing laws to tax the machines?
Was it the ruling I expected? I'd say I was probably cautiously optimistic. And yeah, so to answer that point, what Pennsylvania is going to do is anyone's guess. Years and years ago, when I was the GC of Rivers, there was a law, a certain tax on casinos that got thrown out as being unconstitutional because Pennsylvania doesn't allow for progressive taxation. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional, but we're going to stay the enforcement of our decision for 4 months because we want to give the legislature a chance to fix it. Legislature didn't get that done in 4 months. Pennsylvania Supreme Court gave them 4 more months. Legislature still didn't get it done. Supreme Court said, all right, time's up. And all of a sudden they got it done, right? Government here works in mysterious ways. And there aren't many Supreme Courts that would basically say we found a constitutional violation, but we're going to let that occur for 8 more months while we get it sorted out, right? So where that goes, look, I don't think they can't, if you tax that industry at the same way that you tax the regulated casino industry, I think, it's not necessarily going to be viable. But that really sort of then begs the point of like, well, should it be viable in a way that can compete with it can essentially mirror the regulated industry, right? If it's not going to be taxed the same. So, right. So we can have that debate. But look, I think what's important is when we talk about skill games, because I very, very much distinguish the machines that were ultimately outlawed in Pennsylvania from like true skill games. And there are some really great operators out there that are doing some awesome stuff on skill games, right? Where you can play head to head, you can play for real money, you're playing against other people. And these are skill games. I mean, they're how fast you do things, how quickly you can think through things, how strategically you can think through things. And they're amazing. And I love them. And I think that they are a huge, huge asset for everybody. I can't say enough good things about that. The machines that were ultimately, rejected by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and are somewhat ubiquitous in a handful of other states subject to various enforcement actions are not even remotely that. they are like slot machines, right? And they have some little wrinkle that they're claiming is skill. The most comical of which is the one that has the window of here's what's going to happen to your next spin. So the skill is understanding if that's a win or a loss. I mean, it's bonkers, right? And so, like anything else, I think the laws should appropriately put those where they should be, which is you are not skill game, and also very much not inhibit the true skill game operators from doing what they're doing. And that's really going to be the challenge there.
The actual skill games that you were describing, do those exist in Pennsylvania, that there are machines like that where you actually can, for money, play a game of skill against another player?
I don't know about machines, but certainly apps, where you can do this online. And there's great companies out there that are doing just that. They're doing it through B2C, they're doing it B2B. And so I think that's a world that is, to me, wholly separate and apart from anything related to these, slot machines that are, and also, I mean, we can get into, there's policy discussions that maybe we can save for another time, but I mean, these machines tend to be largely in like low income areas. I mean, there's a lot of cash involved. Like you think about, it's not just the regulations from a consumer protection standpoint. Think about the regulations on casinos and cash handling and all of that. And there was a matter maybe like a year or two ago where a clerk in one of these convenience stores in a relatively high crime area in Pennsylvania was like murdered, right? Because they were trying to rob him. And there was a wrongful death suit against the skill game operator, the quote skill game operator. And so there are a lot of negative externalities that flow from these machines that are, again, it's a social policy discussion probably more than anything else, but suffice it to say that some of the regulations that are in place for casinos are there for a reason, and it's to protect against some of these things happening.
So I couldn't possibly talk to a gaming lawyer in 2026 without getting your take on prediction markets. Those are the rules. I have to bring up the subject. They're so many cases swirling at once in numerous states. Everyone seems to agree this is headed to the Supreme Court eventually. What are your thoughts on how it's played out so far with this sort of mix of rulings in each direction? Are there any rulings or legal maneuverings you've seen so far that really surprised you that maybe you didn't see coming?
I would say the only one that's probably surprised me to a material degree is the lack of success on getting these state court cases removed to federal court under federal preemption, saying that federal law governs. I think federal courts are usually more inclined to agree with that posture if you have a reasonably strong hook, and I think there was that hook. So I'm not really opining on what the merits of that would be, but more just who should be deciding it and how that should be decided. So that one has been a little bit surprising for me. The chaos that has ensued is not at all surprising to me. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. And I think where business, again, this is not, what I'm about to say is not a statement that's all unique to prediction markets or even the gaming industry. Businesses very much want legal certainty where they can get it. And, I mean, I dealt with this much earlier in my career in like the pharmaceutical industry and the way that they would settle cases, brands would settle cases with generics, and there were antitrust implications to it called reverse payments. And like, what you would really hear is just like, kind of tell us what the rules are and we'll play by them. But like, it's really hard to do it when everyone's like, oh, figure it out, try your best. Like, you're going to get sued either way, and then we'll see where it goes, right? And so I think that it would behoove everybody for this sort of, chaos to reach some sort of resolution sooner rather than later. I think that folks that are looking to Congress to step in and solve it are perhaps, that's unlikely. And honestly, if they did, it's still unlikely that it would truly solve it versus just create a new form of chaos. So I think I don't have too much to add to what's been said by a lot of people, which is we have the district courts coming out as we have. I think we have enough on the way of circuit splits, and we certainly will have more. And yeah, this is going to get teed up to the Supreme Court. I think the question then is, once that occurs, now what, if anything, happens on the federal legislative end, right? And I think some of that will depend on how the Supreme Court comes out. If they if they fall sharply on one side versus try to, distinguish, single game versus player versus multi-game versus, right? And sports versus weather versus, and all of these types of things. So Look, I think that no matter what happens, barring just an absolute bright line ruling one way or the other, or a bright line legislation one way or the other, we're going to continue to see this evolve in some way, shape, or form, because that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen in fantasy sports. And again, that's what we've seen in other industries when Uber and Lyft took over what used to be the taxi industry. We saw not an outlawing, but now we saw all of these regulations coming out and all of these taxes coming out and all these different, right? So again, I think we have to look beyond our own industry to say what's sort of the world of things that are on the table for happening here. And you're going to see things that mirror what's happened elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess whatever the verdict, assuming it does go to the Supreme Court, whatever the verdict ends up being, and it seems like it's somewhat settled or whatever, then there's going to be the next wave of who's looking for loopholes around that and how the rules continue to be tweaked and adjusted from there. I don't think that'll be the final word, it seems like.
I can't imagine it'll be the final word. And again, and the one thing I would say though is and you're not the only person, I've caught myself using the word loopholes, and sometimes they are. Some things are loopholes. Others are not. Others are left intentionally vague or open-ended. We understand that technology evolves. What may seem like a loophole, a law that was written in the 1800s, right, is not, if you try to make things too specific to what was going on back then, you're going to have a million loopholes now, right? Well, this doesn't say anything about computers, right? We can just use computers. So sometimes the open-endedness of these things are intentional and actually not a fallacy. It creates some issues, but it's not just that the legislators didn't know what they were doing. And I think that's often something that gets unappreciated when the word loophole is used in certain contexts.
So last thing, you're a Pennsylvania guy who spends time around Pennsylvania casinos and Atlantic City casinos. A lot of execs in Atlantic City have been sending up SOS flares over New York City getting casinos. What's your take on the impact? Are you expecting the number of casinos in AC, which is currently 9, to be reduced in a few years? Any sort of guess what the actual impact once New York has its full 3 casinos up and running will be?
I think the biggest question is, look, New York getting casinos is not going to have some positive effect on South Jersey. I think that'd be hard to pencil. But a lot of the negative effect has already materialized, not so much from New York, right, but from Pennsylvania, certainly, and Maryland, right? And we saw that. You saw that happen. You saw those gaming revenues shift, right? So how much more of that is going to be quote unquote cannibalized? It's a good question, right? I mean, we have online casino gaming in New Jersey. So they're already able to hit those folks. They're, attract those folks to an alternative product without having to travel. Because, North Jersey is not like around the corner from Atlantic City. Right? I mean, people used to do this as like a day trip and obviously, don't have to anymore. But what's it called? Wind Creek in Bethlehem is like, an hour from like North Jersey. I mean, so it was already a closer option than South Jersey is. But look, this is the question that I think the casinos have had to answer for a while is, what are we offering? What are we offering besides just gaming? And are we doing it better than our competition? And that was true within Atlantic City and inter Northeast, right? And so Atlantic City has, if I told you 40 years ago, we have 2 major casino resort destinations in the United States. One is in the middle of a desert near it's 4 hours from like anything. And the other is literally on the ocean with beachfront. Like, which one of those two is going to become like, only one of those two is going to make it enormous, right? Like, which one? I mean, I don't think many of us like it, right? Like, you wouldn't necessarily pick the winner. So why did Vegas become what it is and why? And there are more answers than we have time to talk about, right? But, government plays a role, who you're drawing, from where you're drawing them, but what you're offering them. And, I say this, my parents my mom likes to go to Las Vegas, not because she likes to gamble. She'll go for 2 or 3 days. She'll play slots for an hour in total, but she likes the restaurant. She likes the shows. She likes this. She likes that. And right, she likes the weather. And you don't get her going to Atlantic City, even though she lives in Pittsburgh and one's way more convenient than the other, right? So I think, has that ship sailed? Certainly to be Las Vegas, yes, that ship has sailed. But how far has that ship sailed, and to where can we get it back? That's a question that only really the stakeholders there can answer. But I think that's the question that they should be looking to answer. It's not, New York or North Jersey is just another issue, but it would be far less of an issue if the question of what is Atlantic City besides the Borgata for a lot of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, in Harrah's, right? But like, what is it drawing and why is it drawing them? And I think that's a question that New York just exacerbates, doesn't create.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And using the Vegas example, competition popped up regionally, California casinos, Arizona, it's, they're all over the place, and Vegas remains Vegas and remains a destination, and Atlantic City is Atlantic City and somewhat of a destination for some people, but definitely not Vegas.
But you look around, I mean, you go a couple miles south of Atlantic City, there's some beautiful beach towns, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's not like it's not like the area can't be that, or at least more of that. But for whatever reason, Atlantic City hasn't really figured out how to make it into, the tourist destination that I truly, truly think it could have been. It was to a large degree, and it declined from that. And I think it needs to look at how it can try better to get back there or closer to that. Yeah. And then you'll get people that say, I don't want to drive to X city, X town or X casino, even though it's 30 minutes from my house. I'll drive the hour and a half. Because if you want to fly 5 hours to Vegas, then you might be willing to drive an hour and a half, right, to another coastal resort, especially during the summer.
Well, next time you're on the podcast, we'll get your full 12-point plan to save Atlantic City and get it thriving again. But we'll save that for your next appearance. We won't give it all.
There's some great restaurants there, though. I'll tell you what. I'm not going to say what they are because it's a lot harder to get. It's already hard enough to get reservations. But there's some great restaurants and some great there's some great areas like Gardner's Basin in that area where like you want to just go and have a beer and like chill out by the water. And so Atlantic City does have some hidden gems that aren't in casinos, but they're sufficient hidden that those of us that know where they are can still go there.
And you're selfishly gonna keep them on the down low. I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
To all our listeners, I'll mention you can connect with Evan on LinkedIn. He's also on Twitter, though not too active, but you can find him at EW Davis. And there's the website, rccblaw.com. Anywhere else I didn't mention that people should go to keep tabs on you?
No, you mentioned the conference I'll be at, and I love just chatting with people. So I tell people all the time, reach out on LinkedIn, email me. I'll be, whether it's like G2E or SPC or any of these things, love just chatting with people and hearing about what's going on, because that's how I learn about the industry, is just by talking to the folks who are in it and hearing what's on their minds. So yeah, reach out.
All right, fantastic. Well, this has been great. I'm not sure why I didn't invite you on the podcast sooner, but I'm glad you were able to come on now, and I'm sure I'll have you back. But thanks so much, Evan, for coming on Low Rollers.
Oh, thanks. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Okay, my thanks again to Evan. Really interesting insights there. A few things I hadn't really thought about before. So, for my closing commentary, I must admit, I didn't do any particularly memorable gambling myself over the past week, but I watched plenty of gambling on my TV, hours and hours of World Series of Poker final table coverage on ESPN and ESPN2, and I just want to take a moment to applaud Ali Nejad and Nick Schulman for how damn good they are at this, and how good they are together. And this isn't a hot take. Everyone who watches poker has been singing their praises for years. I don't think there's a poker fan alive who's ever said a bad word about Nick Schulman. They're both quick and sharp and don't come off as a-holes, and they have great chemistry together. They know how to play off each other, set each other up. They sell each other's jokes without overselling each other's jokes. Poker commentary is interesting in that it's nothing like basketball or football or hockey where there's constantly action to call and no time to digress into side topics. Poker is more like baseball, where it's all about the digressions. And the question becomes, can the commentators have a casual conversation during the downtime that keeps me interested? You have to call the game too and analyze the game too, of course, but the challenge is to make it feel like these are my two buddies having a chat over a beer, cracking a few jokes as they watch with me. Now, Ollie and Nick are somewhat erudite for a couple of beer-swilling buddies, but they're having fun, they're making it fun for the viewer, and here's the test. On night 2, I couldn't watch live when it started. I had to start a little late and catch up. And under normal circumstances, I might have fast-forwarded a bit between hands, or fast-forwarded through the pre-flop play just to keep it moving along, but I didn't want to miss what my friends Nick and Ali had to say. So I only skipped commercials. I did miss some of what they said anyway, but that's just because I have undiagnosed narcolepsy and this crap is on way past my bedtime. But anyway, incredibly unhot take here, Ali Nejad and Nick Schulman are phenomenal at calling poker together. They are a pocket pair of kings. Long may they reign. And with that, until next week, this has been Low Rollers, Small Stakes, and Hot Takes.